I've got a paper, so I'll just read part here, but also because it's kind of an informal setting, so I'll try to go informal as well. Okay, so of course I want to thank you for spending your precious Saturday evening with me to try to make it kind of like solve a puzzle together, and that's the puzzle of what does the were-tiger mean in oral folk tales, but as well as popular culture, right? And I want to invite, not invite, I want to thank you. You have to forgive me, I was from another talk and I said yes twice. Anyway, I want to thank AFA for inviting me, but also today the talk, you'll get 2 for the price of 1, right? I'm also inviting my colleague and collaborator, Dr. Patricia Hartwig, right, who studies the Makyong performances in the region, right? And she'll explain to you more later. And we'll see how it goes. Either we'll do a conversation or Patricia also has a kind of presentation. We'll ask you later what you prefer, and then we move on, right, from there. And then we'll have a conversation to see how things go, okay? So Patricia is a Fulbright scholar. Right now, currently based in Bintan, and we're very lucky to have her here in Singapore today. Right? Thank you, Patricia. Okay, so I want to start by showing a picture. And this is the picture. If you are a Netflix, kind of consumer like me, there is a documentary that I recommend you. I'm a true crime kind of buff in some ways. This is Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy is a very famous or infamous serial killer in America, right? And Bundy is interesting in the serial killer phenomenon because Bundy is someone who you would not normally see as a serial killer, right? Because he's very charming, he's your blue-eyed American boy, stuff like that, right? And so he doesn't fit the profile of a serial killer. And the reason why I brought this up is because of the very idea of the were-tigers. The notion that monsters walk among us and monsters possibly look like us, are one of us, right? And we do not expect them to be, with fangs and stuff like that. And many monsters you see maybe on display, the oily man, kind of, exists in the in-between space, being like a normal person on some occasion, but then becomes the oily man on other occasions. And the were-tiger is such a figure as well, right? So that's the interesting character. We think about monsters, and there are people who 24/7 behave like a monster, and in fact assumes the position or the countenance of a monster. And then you have people like Ted Bundy. And the reason why he's so prolific, and I'm sorry to use the word prolific when talking about his what he does, right, is because he's just like one of us. And in fact, victims have said that they see him as as someone that they can actually relate to. He's got a fan base even when he went on trial, right? And so I recommend that you see the documentary, not to glorify him, but to understand the psyche and of the monster, but also how we react to a real monster, right? Not a kind of folklorish kind of character. Okay. So State of Motion has 2 words that is based on the notion of fear and longing, which is very interesting, right? Fear, of course, is what you totally associate when you think about the monster. It's the natural drive to try to kind of like move away from the monster, driven by fear. But the longing is the interesting part of this tour, right? Do you long for a monster, or do you long to be like the monster? And if you think about the figure of Ted Bundy again, I'll go back a bit to him. Some people want to be like him, right? And in fact, the fan base wants to be with him, right? And stuff like that. So there is a kind of utopian element to the notion of longing of monsters as well, right? And think about all the other monsters that you have encountered. The notion of the Frankenstein, a kind of longing to try to have the superpowers that a Frankenstein monster has, right? But also a kind of fear of going too far, right? And so that's I'll start with that. So because I came from a talk on utopian element and about early print advertisement, I want to show you a kind of one of the early print ads from the Selling Dreams exhibition. And this is basically the tiger balm ointment, right? And you can see here the tiger has returned to cure all your ills. This is the notion of the longing for the monster, right? And this ad came about, this was in 1946, a year before the first advert of before the sorry, this is the last year of the British military administration when when British came back to reoccupy Singapore after Japanese occupation. Right? Sorry. Yep. So this was under Lord Mountbatten. The tiger here is not just simply a tiger. The tiger is more than just a cure for all your ills. It's interesting that the notion of curing all your ills is there, because that's also a very utopian notion of trying to, of putting all your hopes in one basket, right? That's very utopian in that sense. It's not diversifying your hope, but putting it all in one basket. And then the notion of the tiger. Who does the tiger represent? Do the tiger represent the British victory over the Japanese? Because of course this was just right after. Or does the tiger represent the end of military rule by Britain, and so the coming of the local to kind of like, cure all your ills, right? So it's much deeper than just an ad for an ointment, right? It is a veiled message for maybe self-determination, right? In that sense. Okay. There is also the first exhibit that you might have seen if you have seen the exhibit here, and that's Ho Su Nian's exhibit. Okay, before I move into that, Ho Su Nian actually made a reference to, in the information to that exhibit, made a reference to this painting by Henrik Lutzmann, Uninterrupted Road Surveying in Singapore. So again, relate this to the tiger balm ointment advertisement, and you see the figure of the tiger here appearing out of the jungle from nowhere, disturbing a vocation of people who were mainly made up of natives, but also one colonial there. Right? Maybe I can pause here and just ask you what you think this painting represents. Right? I'm not looking for a right or wrong answer. I'm just looking for impressions. Right? What do you think this painting represents? Painted in 1865, so it must have been at the height of colonization. Right? What do you think the tiger represents? And free to say anything.
The thrill of the exotic.
Sorry?
The thrill of the exotic.
The thrill of the exotic, right? And the exotic would mean the forest, the tiger?
Well, no, I mean the colonies.
Okay.
I mean, like it's only the white man and the tiger actually have their faces really exposed, and so it's like they're in dialogue.
Excellent. Okay. Other views?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
This reminds me of Orville's piece, Shooting the Elephant.
Okay.
He wrote this before. When he was a colonial administrator in India, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Burma. You're right. My bad. But yes, this confrontation between the beast and the. I don't know.
Yeah. Is the beast confronting the natives, or is the beast confronting the white man, or is the beast confronting this device over here, which I don't know what it's called? Sorry. Theodolite. The theodolite, right? Which is the thing that you use to measure the level of the wood, right? So what is really happening here? There is a confrontation. The lush greenery has unveiled a monster, right? And the monster leaps onto a group of people, and it's unclear who the monster is unleashing itself onto, right? So, and it really depends on from which position you come from. I wonder though what Henrik Lutzmann was thinking, right? When he was he a critic of maybe unbridled progress in some ways, right? That a critic of colonization in that sense, right? Or is he saying something else, right? That there is danger in trying to get too close to the locals or something like that. I'm not sure, right? So on the one hand, you can think about what he intended. On the other hand, I think it really doesn't matter. It really matters what we take from the painting. And sometimes we go to a painting with absolutely no idea what the author or the painter wants. So yeah, that's the reader response to it. Anyway. Okay. Let me just gather my thoughts. So one conclusion, I studied utopia for a number of years, right? And the idea of longing, I want to go back to that. And one conclusion that I gather from the study of utopia over a long period, sustained study in its various forms. So I studied it in novels, also in Islamic theology, also early print advertisement forms of utopia. When you think about utopia in the discourse locally, utopia is always taught in relation to ideology. Utopia is a bad thing because it tells you of something that is not proper, right? That means it's very escapist in that sense, right? But utopia can also be a good thing in that it is not just an escapism, but it can be something to do with revolutionary zeal. If you look at utopia not as a destination or a blueprint, but utopia as a kind of voyage or a kind of impulse, a desire, right? Utopianism, therefore, is more revolutionary than utopia itself, right? So the voyage is more important than the destination in that sense, right? And so one man's utopia is another man's dystopia, and we can think of the monster in North America, and that is Donald Trump, for instance, right? The perspective that we can adopt when considering a monster such as Were Tiger is that he looks like the normal man, and he peddles a utopianism, maybe, right? A kind of longing towards something, and then you want that, but maybe you could not really identify what exactly is wrong with that picture, right? And so in every longing for a monster, there is also the danger there, right? And vice versa. That's what I'm trying to say here. So there is a kind of dual perspective, and this is the dual perspective that is invoked in Ho Sun Yen's work. When you go into the exhibit, you see two screens, right, and a narrative, right, a narrative unfolding that is similar but not the same, right? And so you, like as an audience looking at these two screens playing at you and unveiling the story of the Were Tiger, would sometimes want to look right and sometimes want to look left, and sometimes in a kind of visceral movement don't know where to look, right? Just like the battle, so the exhibit itself positions you as a Were Tiger, right? In a sense that the Were Tiger sometimes cannot control his being, right? Coming in dual natured and sometimes going that way or the other way. So it's very interesting in that sense, the kind of unfolding, mirroring and stuff like that that's happening in Ho Sun Yen's work. But not all Were Tigers cannot control when they can become, right? Some Were Tigers can actually do that. And here I will actually go to my paper because I have a lot of details to want to share with you and I cannot remember everything, okay? So I want to begin by looking at oral folk tales of Were Tigers. Right. So let me read it. A comprehensive survey of Were Tiger narratives from the Malay archipelago by Robert Wessing, his book is here, divides archetypes of Were Tigers roughly into two primary groups. One is tiger spirits. Another one are those who transform tigers into tigers by way of magic, right? While there are variations within each group, Wessing comes to the conclusion that the first group, the Were Tigers, the tiger spirits, are benevolent, right? They are the nice ones. And the second groups are the dangerous ones. While the populace of pre-colonial Malay archipelago was then unfettered by the limits of nation states, borders still bothered them. This is true of one of the most famous Were Tiger legends of Peninsular Malaya. So you must have heard of Negeri Sembilan. It's very hard to show, but I'm gonna point to you. This is Mount Ophir, is Gunung Ledang. This is Gunung Ledang here, Gunung Ledang National Park, and this is another gunung near Negeri Sembilan. Okay, so there are two clans of Were Tigers that live here. This is according to oral folk tales. Okay, right. So there was an epic battle that happened between two Were Tiger villages, one in Gunung Asing or up here in Negeri Sembilan, and the Gunung Ledang Were Tigers. And this battle happened in the present day state of Negeri Sembilan that resulted in a hill called Bukit Putus. Putus means kind of like broken, right? Okay, so according to Zainal Abidin in a 1925 article, one of the factions is led by a very fierce and but very pious Were Tiger called Datuk Paroy of Gunung Angsi. Okay, Gunung Angsi. This is Gunung Angsi today. So Datuk Paroy is the leader of this group of tiger. This is a mountain located in Negeri Sembilan. The other faction is commanded by the Datuk Gunung Ledang, who hails, as his name suggests, from Gunung Ledang itself. In English it would be Mount Ophir, right? At the present day state of Johor. Before getting into the course of the battle, it is important to note that the two clans also represent two different types of were-tigers. Datuk Paroi and his followers are the spirit tigers, the benevolent type, right? And Datuk Paroi himself only became a were-tiger after his death. So he's already dead, he's a spirit, and he becomes a were-tiger. And there are a lot of stories surrounding how he became were-tigers. At their village in Gunung Angsi, they engaged in banal human conduct such as farming, fishing, right? But they also read the Quran. They were pious Muslims, right? And perform prayers. And to hone their fighting skills, they engage in the martial arts known as silat. So you know there is a silat Harimeow as well, right? Which is in the style of the tiger. It's also noteworthy that the person, the figure of Datuk Paroi, is highly revered during Zainal's Abidin's time. He wrote the article in 1925. It is said that the earth contained within Paroi's footprints can be dug up, and I'm quoting here, dug up, kept up as protective talisman against demons, misfortunes, and also other temporal tigers. Okay? Meanwhile, his grave, somewhere along the road leading to the gunung, or the mountain, is taken as a sacred shrine, and it's called a keramat. Okay? Located near a stream on the left side of the road between Seremban and Kuala Pilar, it is littered with offerings like drumsticks and toasted rice, indicating actually that who are the ones who visit the keramat is not just the Malays but also the Tamils and the Chinese. Okay, so it's very interesting. There is a multicultural were-tiger. It's a bit like the Datuk Gong. You know the Datuk Gong, and when people go there, not all of them are not just the Chinese, right? But there are also Malays who actually, and I don't think there are less Malays who go out there now, but there were. On the other hand, the were-tigers of Gunung Ledang are shapeshifters. They are not spirits leading second lives. Even though Datuk Gunung Ledang is their commander, this clan is ruled by actually the Putri Gunung Ledang, the princess of Gunung Ledang. According to the famous legend, the princess and the sorceress of Mount Ophir, who was unsuccessfully wooed by the last Sultan of Malacca, as legend has it. So there was a movie, this is the movie with Nasir, who's a Singaporean, and this is the Sultan wants to marry the princess, and Hang Tuah is the kind of warrior that actually Putri Gunung Ledang fell in love with, rather than with the Sultan. But the Sultan was thought to be some authoritarian ruler, a tyrant basically, right? And this is a picture I took from the internet. I don't know about copyright, but it's by a school in Penang who actually, in this movie there were no mention of were-tigers, but in this rendition in a Pulau Penang school, they actually had the were-tigers in the story of Gunung Ledang. So there were different variations there. So similar to the Angsi clan, the Ledang tigers also farm, they also plant, they also fish when in their human form. But they are ferocious and wild in their tiger form, more wild than the Gunung Angsi group, right? And have the habit of wreaking havoc in the neighboring villages actually. So that's why one of them, they are actually called Harimau berantai, which means enchained tigers. Okay, let me put it here. Okay. So this is from Zainal Abidin's piece. The moment they or any of them take on the shape of a tiger, they become vicious and dangerous again. And so to save the surrounding, they had to be chained up, right? And from their depredations, as their movements become automatically restricted as heavy chains are by some mysterious power clamped around their neck. So one of them actually escaped this chain and went into Gunung Angsi, and a big fight ensued between the two clans, right? That resulted in Bukit Putus, because it was such a ferocious fight that the hill was cut into half, something like that. Okay? So after that, the winner of that, a gang of the Ledang tigers came to confront the Datuk Paroi, who's the leader of just the Gunung Angsi. But just one Datuk Paroi beat all of them, right? And so none of them ever dared to go back to Gunung Angsi ever again. This is according to folklore. Any questions so far? Everything okay, right? So in the absence of other, yes?
I'm still a bit confused about the difference between the two. Like there's the spirit tigers and the shapeshifters.
Yes.
So the spirit tigers they're like more like humans, or?
The spirit tigers used to be human beings who passed away, but by way of magic became spirit tigers. So they are themselves in magical form already.
Oh, okay.
So it's very, whereas the shapeshifters are like pets that the princess Gunung Lidang kept to guard. So they are her army, basically.
So
army of force.
So it's basically sort of ghosts and demon slaves.
In a way, yes, that's right, yeah. Yeah. There are other types of were-tigers, but I'll get to that as we go along. Okay. In the absence of competing oral narratives, it appears here that Paroy's supremacy was premised on his ability to manipulate matter because he's a spirit, right? As an yeah.
And when was all this supposed to have taken place?
The article that Zainal Abidin writes was 1925. So around the time that Hang Tuah and Gunung Ledang, so around that would be the
1400s.
Yeah, 1400s. Yeah. So
1400s is after the fall of Malacca.
yeah, because the last sultan.
Yeah.
So it's after the Sultan falls.
During the reign of the last sultan.
Yeah. Okay.
Last sultan of Malacca. Okay. So the legend suggests that the superiority of other worldliness trumps the superiority of this worldliness, because this tiger, the Ledang tiger, they are very material tigers. They are, tigers that are grounded to the ground. They are not like tigers that can, move and magically disappear and whose footprints can become talisman against, evils and stuff like that. So they are very scientific tiger, I think, in some ways, right? So I want to talk about a third type of were-tiger that can, from the oral folklore, but not in Malayan Peninsula, but in Java, right? And it's called the Macan gadungan. Okay, so it's mainly in the East Java part, in the Kediri area, the Lodoyo region, the village around here. But later I will also move up a little bit just to give you a sense of it. Peter Bungat, who's a writer who wrote this book called Frontiers of Fear, talk about the Macan gadungan. These are shapeshifters, and these are human beings with the ability to transform themselves as were-tiger by way of magic. So you have three types. One is tiger spirits. One is the tigers that are like pets. They are a bit mindless in some ways. And then you have people who actually use magic to manipulate to become were-tigers. This is the third type, and they are the Macan gadungan. Okay, and Asing tigers were not naturally born shapeshifters like the Ledang tigers. The mythic quality of the Javanese legend is heightened by the haziness of the Macan gadungan's location. So, although they were generally in East Java, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly where the were-tiger villages are. Some say in Mount Kelot, in Blitar district, some say in Lodoyo. So there was a bit of confusion about where they exactly come from. In the case of the Macan gadungan, the place itself became a central part of their myth. And why? Because it already has a reputation of being tiger country, even before as the colonials come, right? And it was prior to 1800, a wild, almost uninhabited area, entirely covered by forests and swarming with tigers. That's what Bungat writes about the place. And the area was home to the kingdom of Kadiri, which is a Hindu Buddhist state. And that this reigned between the 11th century to the 16th century. And according to Bungat, somewhere in the 12th century, under the rule of the Seer king Jayabaya, there was a man that first mastered the art of morphing into a were-tiger. So it was not something that is hereditary or something like that. It was the first man who manipulated the use of magic and then passed maybe his knowledge on to others. That the third Lodoyo forest type of tiger come along, the Macan gadungan. Right? Basically, there is also a controversy about the term gadung itself. So if you know about where the word assassin comes from, it's from a sect called the Hasasin. Right? Basically, it was a Shia sect somewhere like that, and that they use a drug called the hashish to kind of like work themselves up to try to gather something. A similar thing happens. This is somewhere in the Middle East, kind of historical folklore, right? But the gadungan as well was something similar. The word gadung itself basically refers to a type of yam that can intoxicate its users. While the word gadungan also has the connotation of deceit or disguise. So, combined together, it can be taken to mean that Lodoyo were-tigers, the one from East Java, were actually mock tigers. They are not true tigers. As Bungat puts it, it enhances the artificiality of this type of were-tigers, because they can only be achieved through sorcery. So by man-made means, they made themselves. So self-made tiger rather than self-made man in that sense. Okay, in summary, all these three oral narratives point to three types of were-tigers: spirit tigers, naturally born tigers, and also then humans who use magic to become were-tigers. And in fact, there are more types if you actually want to know, but I won't go through them here because I want to go into modern renditions of the were-tiger. Okay, and so what I will do is talk about two modern renditions of it. One of which is the P. Ramlee movie called Sitora Harimau Jadian. In the 20th century, what time is it now? Still got time, right? Yeah. Give me another 10 minutes and then we'll move on, yeah? Okay. This is the last part of it and then we can move on to a conversation. Because I also don't want to just read, I feel like I thought it would be more formal than this, but it's okay. In the 20th century, were-tigers continued to hold sway over the cultural imaginary of natives by the Malay archipelago as the region modernizes. By natives, I'm of course referring to the Malays and Javanese, though the term can also refer to the Dayaks. In fact, the Dayaks or the indigenous people also have their own were-tiger narratives. And I won't go through it here, but one story that you might want to check out is called Danjai and the Were-Tiger's Sister. It's a bit, it involves beheading. I won't be talking about that one though. It is important to note that the trope has fired up the literary imagination of colonial writers too. And if you think about Hugh Clifford, he writes of a were-tiger in Slim Valley between the Malaysian states of Pahang and Perak in one of his anthology called The Further Side of Silence. And then this fear of outsiders also appears in Sitora Harimau Jadian, reproduced as a novel in 1965. The movie was first released in 1964, made into a novel in 65, then re-released as a novel, the one that you see here in 2012 by Fixie in KL. So let me tell you the story of a quick synopsis of the book itself. The novel recounts the tale of a fictional Malaysian village called Kampong Kiambang, and residents there were being terrorized by a were-tiger named Sitora. But actually, if you think about the word Sitora, Tora is tiger in Japanese, right? So Sitora is the tiger basically. So Sitora put together is a combination of, it's actually not Malay, it's a Japanese name to refer to. I don't know what it means, but we can talk about that later. So hope comes in the form of Effendi. Effendi is a medical doctor from the city who was sent by the government to the village to try to introduce to the villagers the marvels of modern science, and at the same time act as a sort of myth buster to dispel all this traditional superstitious belief in the were-tiger. So while Effendi was not successful at trying to quell those superstition, he actually managed to capture Sitora with the help of some other villagers. Sitora was actually killed by one of the village elder, Pendeka means warrior, and who was actually a teacher of Silat. This is very ironical because a teacher of Silat kills the were-tiger, possibly using the Silat of the tiger form. Miraculously, Sitora's body then disappears after that kind of murder, that killing, right? And then there was an ambush and the performance of a ritual by Sitora, who turns out none other than actually the Dukun. The Dukun is like a witch doctor of the village, right? And he was supposed to be the were-tiger. And then here you can see like excerpts from the movie. It's very hard to see, but this is like tiger face. Or man over this one, they were fighting basically. And you can see interestingly that this is the doctor, I think. He wears Western style uniform, right? Blazer and stuff like that. So modernity versus like kind of non-modernity. Even though this is the medical doctor himself, which is P. Ramlee, who has been infected by the Dukun. Because what happens is the Dukun gave him the virus, and the way that the Dukun gave him the virus is very interesting because it's like a blood transfusion. He had to cut himself and cut the other person and then like put it together, something like that. And then it's very scientific in the way the tiger became, right? It's very different from like biting and then or something like that. It's almost like the Western vampire ritual of creating a vampire. Okay. And actually, this is another excerpt from the scene. And this is the transformation that happened. Right? This is what I've translated. The were-tiger takes the knife from his waist, he nicks the doctor's neck, Then he makes a cut on his own hand, and he places the wound on his hand on the young doctor's bleeding neck. And blood flows between the hand and Dr. Effendi's neck, and the blood between them intermingle with each other, and so the doctor became a were-tiger. So this scene actually describes his becoming from man to monster, suggests an important change in the trope of the were-tiger of the old. Right? Here the process is clinical, almost reminiscent of a blood transfusion, like I said before, between donor and patient. Seen in this way, the origin of the were-tiger is depicted as a process, as a scientific process, making the were-tiger a creature of modernity. Another aspect of the scene entrenches this process. The scene places emphasis on the material and not the abstract. The were-tigers came into being as not through death as spirits or the use of magic or the transmigration of soul or magic. In fact, it comes into being through material means. And Wessing has also described this, and we can think about The Island of Dr. Maru. Have you heard of this book by H.G. Wells? It's if you look at the movie, you can actually see that it's placed somewhere in Indonesia, right? And so it's very interesting that H.G. Wells imagined the were-tigers in that sense, right? Because if you look at H.G. Wells, I mean, if you consider his story, the animals or the man-animals were created out of a process of science again, right? Which is somewhat similar to what's happening here in Setora, Harimau, jadi-jadian. Another work that I want to bring up is Jalaki Harimau by Eka Kurniawan. Okay. Anybody read this book? So this book was first written in Bahasa and then translated into English. It's a very interesting book about a were-tiger. I'll just go through it. Okay, so what happened here is that Eka Kurniawan 2 years ago came to Singapore for the Writers' Festival, and people have been hailing him as the new Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? And so I asked him this question and said, how do you feel about being the new Marquez? And he said that he didn't want to be the new Marquez. He basically was using narratives that were happening then and just rewriting them. So he wasn't. So this actually says a lot about the kind of culture industry that we have here. How people from the outside want to always look at the writer a certain way when his intention was not that, was just channeling through traditional forms of storytelling, right? Okay, so what happened then is that he said that, and this got me thinking about what aspects of the were-tiger narratives was he trying to kind of get kind of channel, right? So by way of a short synopsis, the story opens at an Indonesian village with news of the horrific murder of Anwar Sadat. You can see here the influence of Egyptian kind of like or Middle Eastern stories. A married but amorous man by the hot-headed young villager called Marjo. Marjo is actually the were-tigers. Authorities are perplexed that Anwar's body seems to be ravaged by a wild animal, and the reader is led to believe that this is the doing of a were-tiger that resides within Marjo. Marjo himself is a man, a young boy. In flashback, as a reader, you begin to understand the event leading up to the murder. Anwar had gotten Marjo's mother pregnant, and when Anwar decided Marjo decided to speak to Anwar about it, one fateful day, he got agitated and then proclaimed that he did not love the mother. This is Anwar here, the amorous man. And then Marjo, even though he was trying to be nice to the guy because he brought his mother happiness, couldn't control the were-tiger within him, and the were-tiger appeared and straight away killed Anwar Sadat. Right? And the interesting thing is that the tiger is not exactly a tiger but a tigress. Right? So here we see a gendered reading of the were-tiger. Actually, the tiger becoming female, is feminized. Right? And here is a kind of conversation about how the were-tiger moves from family to, the were-tiger is kind of an heirloom that resides within the family. You see a hereditary kind of thing going on here, right? So the grandfather possessed the tiger, and the tiger is like one would call it a tiger familiar, right? That means the tiger is kind of like something you own or possess, right? But what's interesting about, and this is a narrative that's also quite traditional, but what's interesting about Eka Kurniawan is that he gave the tigress agency. So it's not Margio who controls the tiger, but the tigress that controls Margio. Tigress choose when to come up, like as in the case of the murder itself, which is very interesting in that sense. We see in man tiger that the two, the Margio and the tigress, are intertwined, but power resides with the tigress, like I said. So, Eka Kurniawan's man tiger appeals to the law of spirit tigers like Datuk Haroy, right? But while magic still prevails in his novel, it renders the tiger spirit feline, independent minded. It also leads readers to think that the beast is the one that controls the human host and not the reverse. And this is what we can talk about with Patricia later, the notion of the ideas of the Anthropocene, which positions the human beings at the top of the chain when it comes to how we control the world and earth and resources. Right? So what I wanted to say was, based on all this, you see a change in cultural trope of how the tradition of the folklore of the old tiger, by way of magic and certain rules and regulations, are changed towards the embrace of science, materialism, and the agency of the female perspective. I'm very interested, this is based on a paper that I've written, and I'm very interested in the text which contains these stories, thinking of those texts as a kind of where text, right? A text that exists in between spaces too, the kind of transformative effect it has. Because I'm thinking along the lines of translation studies and how myths are rewritten, and this is not just the myths of where tigers that are important, but the stories themselves become a kind of transformative vessel, right? And so maybe the whole Sunyan's artwork itself can be thought along those lines of as an art piece that retells old stories and introduces something new. And all this relates to the very idea of Asian modernity that I'm thinking about. I don't want to generalize, but Asian modernity is different from the modernity of the West, where you look at disruption as the primary defining factor, like make it new, as Rapam says, right? And that's the dictum of Western modernity. Eastern modernity looks at the old and then channels the old to introduce something new, right? And these are the texts. And the were tigers seem to be like that, but the text that contains stories of were tigers does the same. Okay? So I will end there, and then I will invite Patricia to carry on. And maybe we can invite Patricia on stage first. But how do you want to do this? Do you want to go through a conversation, or you want to sit through something? Patricia, you have any?